Welcome to the Big Crone Energy podcast. I'm here today with Angie Buchanan. Angie has an enormous, extensive bio. She is the founder of the Earth Tradition Church. Is that correct? You're the founder?
Yes, I'm one of
Uh,
them.
she is a life coach, counselor, priestess. She works with religious trauma. She's a ritualist, does grief counseling, and is a death midwife, but also teaches death midwifery. I know someone who just completed your training. She had nothing but amazing things to say about working with you, Angie.
Well,
So
thank you for
welcome.
having that. And yeah, thank you
Welcome.
for having me on board. And I have to laugh at the massive bio as you referred to it. I guess as you get old, you collect. So
Yeah. Yeah. And our bios get longer and longer. And that's part of why we want to hear your voice, right? That's part of why I want to hear all of my guests' voices because we have a lifetime of experience doing what we do and continuing to collect more tools and to go deeply. Someone said to me the other day about this podcast, she said, listening to you and your guests, it's not like you heard something somewhere. You know it. You
Yep.
lived it. And
Yes.
so yours are the voices that are needed right now, like among many other kinds of voices, right? But I also feel like those of us who have been working in these alternative spirituality communities for our whole lives have something in particular to bring to the table. Before I turn the recording on, we're talking about the time that we're in, what we are able and unable to I should speak for myself, what I'm able and unable to bring to my students and clients in this time about this time. And Angie, you were saying laying low
Hmm.
and listening.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we are in uncharted waters. I don't know that any of us involved in the communities that I'm involved in have ever been through something like this before. And being leadership in a time like this, there's an awful lot of expectation,
Mhm.
and those expectations aren't always able to be met. Understanding and admitting that we don't have the answers is is a part of it. I think I said to you a little bit earlier, Karina, that, for myself and others that I speak with, we've hit the wall and left a bloody streak all the way down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're sitting with our back against the wall right now, just trying to breathe, regroup, assess, do what we can to help where we can.
Mhm.
But it's all in the short term. It's all a short term stopgap. And try to find the people who can help us build a plan for moving forward. It's never good to act impulsively in
Right.
times like this, in my experience.
Right.
Um, it can cause more problems. And so when I see people running around screaming, "The sky is falling," holding their aprons out, it's like, "Okay, we have to stop this because it's ineffective."
Right. Right. I think that there's a moment for me, um, when I get hit with a particularly devastating, and it's all devastating, right? But when I learn new pieces of news, and I do sort of have this moment of like, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And then for me, the only thing that I know to do in that moment is like get back in my body. So, did I eat something? Have I drank enough water today? Go get a glass of water, sit down, ground, take a breath, and like literally look around and say, this is where I am right now, right now, right this minute. You and I are both safe this moment. And so to escalate to the point where we're like, we're not safe, we're not safe, we're not safe, you're going to use up all of your energy. When in this window, we can still look forward and say, okay, what's the next step?
Mhm,
And then what? And then what? But mostly these days, I'm telling people, get in your body.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and your breath, get in
Foundational.
your breath.
Hmm.
Breath is life. I tell my students, "We breathe in, we live, we exhale, we die." You
Hmm.
keep you continue to do that sacred cycle, and you get to stay here in your human form. So, that's the first step is
Right.
to breathe, to just breathe, and then to take care of your basic needs and to think before you act. So, for me, that means determining who is within my circle of influence, who has skills that I might need, what do I have that they may need?
Hmm.
And learning how to trade things, understanding that there's no way to know what's coming
Right.
or who's going to stop what.
Hmm.
We can have those of us that are intuitive or empathic can tend to get a felt sense of things. I think that everything is workable, that everything needs to be considered, and that we need to address ourselves first and then our most vulnerable populations,
Hmm.
all the while supporting the ones in our communities that are already strong and solid and weaving them together, to act as a resource.
Right. Right. I was talking with someone today who was hiring me to do some cooking for a friend of hers whose husband's in the hospital. And she said, "How long have you been doing this?" And I said, I cook for people. Um, and it's only of late that I've sort of thought, you may need to do this for a fee. And so I have a few clients coming on because doing what I do on the internet is not maybe going to support me in this place that we're going. So, what
Right.
other skills do I have that are barterable, that are monetarily exchangeable? Um, but we had a lovely conversation about hyper local, right? Which is one of my
Mhm.
themes. Where do you live? Who are your neighbors? And even if they're not like us, like they don't have the same belief system and have had a very different kind of life than we have, neighbors are neighbors. And it's my neighbor who comes and plows my snow when we have a blizzard like we had tonight. And I bring them eggs and vegetables from my garden. And the interesting thing about trade, right, or barter that I find among neighbors where I live is that it's not an accounting system, right?
Mhm.
It's actually just generosity as opposed to I will make this and you will do that for me, right?
Sure. Yeah, the
All
value is
from a
assigned.
yeah, it comes from a sense of I want to do this for you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, we're, contemplating that now. It's still pretty chilly up here behind the cheddar curtain in Wisconsin, but we do have a great growing season, and we have a lot of, resources around us of people who have chickens and people
Mhm.
who raise their own meat and, people who know how to garden, and so we were discussing the other day that we are privileged enough to have a little bit of land, not a lot, but a little, and a lot more behind us that doesn't belong to us, but is a conservation area. And we also happen to have right across the street from us a beautiful, lovely family that does not hold the same um, spiritual traditions that we do, but they have 6 children, and their children are all, under the age of 15.
Well,
So, we had thought, "Okay, what if we provide all of the materials and have them do the labor for gardening that can help us both because they have a
Mhm.
very small backyard.
Yeah.
And so, have those kids come over and we'll do raised beds and we'll let them plant and weed and harvest and, we kinda got a sample of that. We have an apple tree in our backyard, we call her Miss Apple Tree.
Mm.
She's an every other year bloomer,
Mhm.
but the past 2 times that she's bloomed, we've gotten over 75 bushels of apples
Wow.
off of her, and she's an heirloom. So
Mhm.
she's a Stayman wine sap heirloom, so they're great for just eating or baking and cooking. And I remember during the pandemic, just stress baking, and I
Right.
had,
As we
20
all
apple
did.
strudels
Yeah.
20 apple strudels across the counter, and then we would do porch drops with,
Mhm.
friends and neighbors and go drop it on their porch and then call them and say, "Reverse porch pirate happened at your house,"
Mhm.
and that was where I sort of realized the whole neighbor thing because we hadn't really engaged much with the neighbors, but that apple
Right.
tree brought us together. And I can remember this neighbor in particular after she came over with her kids and we got pictures of them all in the tree and picking apples. She said, "I'm gonna send you some applesauce." And I said, "No, you're not. You can send me blueberry something or strawberry something, but," and she
Right.
was like, "Oh, that's a great idea. What about soup? Soup is great,
Yeah.
just not apples."
Yeah.
And so you learn these ways of negotiating with each other and the joy that comes from the exchange.
Yes. Yeah, and it's joyful. It's joyful. I brought eggs to my neighbors the first year that I lived here. I got chickens and I was bringing eggs up to my neighbors, and it was about the 5th time that I brought her a dozen eggs, and she said, "We don't really eat this many eggs." And I said, "Oh my goodness, thank you for telling me. I don't wanna inundate you, right?
Right.
And this is the wrong thing to bring," I said, "Well, if you need eggs, please tell me and I'll give you some, but I won't just drop them off over here thinking that you guys are eating a dozen eggs a week." And she said, "Oh no, we rarely eat them." So,
Oh,
but again, there's no insult in that, right? And it
no.
was done out of a sense of generosity of like, I have too many eggs. And so
Mhm,
here's some for you, and here's some for you, and here's some for you. And there's joy. And I was thinking before our call about your work with grief and death. And my work always has to do with making the connection between the microcosm that is us and the larger culture. And so I was wondering if we could maybe get into the grief that we're undergoing now. Like there's the
mhm,
fear part, right? But there's also uh, the country that we lived in is no more.
mhm. Yeah, that's true.
And that's big death. That's big grief. And I'm not really hearing a lot of people addressing that. But I'm wondering how we might transfer tools that as a grief counselor and a death midwife to this to ourselves during this time when we have to recognize part of what we're going through is grief.
Mhm,
Um, the fear of death that is here, right? Um, and that process of midwifing a death rather than trying to stop it from happening.
right. Well, that's a multi I can come at that from a lot of different directions. So,
Mm,
let me just begin by saying that grief is a multifaceted beast, and it is the partner of death and loss.
mhm,
We live in a death-denying society. Our culture is death-denying. We fear death, which is not it is not inherent. Fear of death is not inherent. It's
right.
cultural. Avoidance of death is inherent. We don't wanna just walk out in front of that bus, but fear of death is cultural. And so having to start at that very foundational level to even understand what it is that's happening, we as a culture and a country have suffered a loss. And that loss is of the way we thought things were. So there's the disappointment of the discovery that things that we thought were unshakable are in fact not.
Right.
That the what we relied on to be stable is in fact not stable. And
Right.
so recognition of that and coming to the realization that we may not even want to claw our way back to the way things were. We have to figure out how to move forward, and that's the way life goes with any loss.
Mhm.
You know, we lose someone to death, and it's like a piece of us is amputated, and we have to figure out how to navigate the world without that piece.
Right.
And so that's only the beginning of where we are now, because within that umbrella of grief and loss that we're suffering as community and culture, we have lots of other griefs that are happening. We have anticipatory grief, which is the grief and the fear, of the loss that is ahead that maybe hasn't happened yet, and I'm seeing a lot of my people who are losing their jobs,
Yep.
who, their very foundation is shaky. They may be food insecure,
Yep.
and so I'm taking all of this in. I'm also seeing a lot of disenfranchised grief, which is grief that is not necessarily supported by society,
Mhm.
and those are things like grief at the loss of self-identity, grief at the loss of feeling free to express yourself,
Mhm.
both religiously and personally, in ways that are meaningful for fear of being attacked or physically violated.
Right.
And I don't know that this has reached critical mass yet. I don't believe it has.
I don't
And
believe
so
so either. No.
we have to hold that space though to understand that we are in fact grieving, and what we're doing now is trying to figure out how to move forward with what we have and in a world that is not ever going to be the same
Right.
as it once was. And for me, as I moved through this, I realized that there were lots of things that were not so great about what was happening before
Right.
this tower crumbled, as Byron Ballard says, it's tower time. And, the tower card is still happening. It's not like it's fallen and now we get to sift through the rubble. It's still falling,
Yeah.
and we have to figure out how to not get hit by the rest of the rubble, as well as to move through it to bring ourselves to a place where we have, if nothing else, a clearer vision.
Right.
So, that I feel like a lot of these things are not going to be seen as very helpful, and yet sometimes when we articulate them, they tend to they tend to make more sense.
Yeah, I mean, nobody is gonna offer solutions right now, but I think that knowing where we are on the map, knowing that we are in the tower card, and the tower arose for a reason. I may not agree with the reason why the tower was set ablaze, by who set it ablaze, but we all had our matches. Like, I know for many years, people in my communities have always been dreaming of a utopia, right?
Mhm,
Or
mhm.
reiterating nightmare visions of a dystopia.
Or
And
laissez-faire,
Mhm.
just
Yeah,
completely apathetic.
right, right. So, knowing where we stand, um, in the timeline, that we're not at the end, we're actually at the beginning, and that our job is to be here
Mhm.
and to help other people. If we can avoid getting hit by rubble, grab somebody and help them. Give people food, give people money to get a passport, give people a phone number of somebody who can help them.
A
Or
ride,
right.
transportation, that sort of thing. Yeah, I love that you kind of plunged that because I feel like the tower, first of all, mentorship is not what it used to be.
Right.
And we have an awful lot of these younger generations coming up who have no interest in listening to what some of the elder voices have to say.
Yeah.
I think that's a grave mistake,
Same.
so and I've always just listened and not
Mhm.
necessarily bought into what they were saying, but added it, to the information
Right.
I was collecting, and understanding that they have had these experiences and that the experiences, no, they may not be exactly the same. However, they have tools that could be useful. And, a hammer can be used to build or to tear down.
Yes.
So, it's up to the individual that's in the situation to determine how or if that tool is going to be effective for them. The other piece is that I'm seeing an awful lot of what I refer to as cannibalism. And that is when somebody comes up with an idea, people dogpile to tear them apart.
Mm.
And that is, to me, an egregious misuse of energy as well as in a waste of time. Um, and I'm not really sure what to do with that, but I've seen it going on in our communities for decades.
Yes.
And I feel like it's not, but it expands too, because when I look at some of our political parties, in particular, the one political party, I'm not seeing any young faces. I'm seeing plenty of them in the other one, but I'm
Mhm.
not seeing, where are our mentees? Where are the old guard's proteges? Who are they hand feeding? Who are they bringing up? I'm not
Mhm.
seeing it, and that, I think, is a problem.
Yes. When they nominated everybody to the same old seats that they've been having forever, forever, forever. Um, last month, I guess it was last month, the picture came out, and I thought there's not a single person on that committee who is under 70.
And that's not the world. That's
Right.
not the it is people who are 70, they aren't living in the world that people who are 20, 30, 40, 50 are.
Right. Right.
And so they're out of touch with that, and as someone who's approaching, those older years myself,
Mhm.
I have to understand
Yeah.
that, it's I am no longer the young warrior who is
No.
on the front line,
Right.
with breast
Mhm.
shield and sword.
Mhm.
I am in the back of the tent helping to strategize.
Yeah. It was a hard wake up for me, in the last month being like, "Am I gonna go to Boston? Am I gonna go march?" And the answer was, "Karina, you can't."
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't drive to Boston, and I know this to be true for me at my age and my body. I can't drive to Boston and drive home in the same day. If I'm going to Boston, I gotta spend the night because my body hurts so much from being in the car.
Mhm.
And I thought, "And then you're gonna march? You can't do that. You can't bring anything there except pain to yourself. That's not helping." So, what is the role now? And it's so interesting. We're not in the same place as 20-year-olds, right? And 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds. And yet we do have something to say. We do
Mhm.
have wisdom to share. We do have life experience to share. And that's really what this podcast is for, right? I was saw this post the other day, and it was a little video clip, someone talking about whales, elephants, and humans are the only species that the females stop being fertile and go on to live long afterwards.
Mhm. Mhm.
All other species, you're fertile until you're dead. And he said, why? what is it about grandmothers, whether you have children or grandchildren or not, what is it about being an elder that is necessary for evolution? Because if it wasn't necessary for evolution, we wouldn't be here, right?
Mhm.
And he said, the elders carry the wisdom, the life experience, the stories, the skill sets that the younger people need.
The organizational history.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we've
Like,
lived through
I'm
it.
remembering my mother canning tomatoes in her kitchen, and I'm learning, but I'm mostly remembering what she taught me,
Mhm,
and passing that on to my kids who are in their 20s because they're going to need it. They're going to need the skill.
mhm,
And so, this idea of, on the one hand, the older people need to step aside and let the younger people lead, learn to lead. But the younger people also need mentors on
mhm.
how to lead, how to be present, how to lead a ritual, right?
And maybe there's no better way to do that than over a mason jar of homemade spaghetti sauce.
Right.
You
Right.
know, you take care of the global person
Mhm.
and yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. They need to know how I did it, how you did it,
Mhm.
how it was done in our day, and then we need to learn to let them take that and modify it in the way that's best for them and not try to be possessive or hold on to ownership of it or and I think that's one of the hardest things, especially for strong women like you and I, who are used to just marching in and saying, "This is
Yeah.
what it is, and
This
here's
is
how
what's
we're gonna
happening.
do this." Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here's what we're gonna do. Here's the plan.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really hard role to let go of, but one that as I do let go of it, I find a different sense of serenity within myself
Mhm.
and peace, knowing that I've passed that information on and it's a seed, and I may never get to see what grows out of that, but, and I'm sure that you have heard this too, where you have students from decades ago that come back and say, "I remember that time when you said,"
Yeah.
and I think to myself, "You were listening.
Right?
You were listening."
I
Thank
I
you for
often
letting me
say, "I
know.
said that?
Mm,
I said that? Wow." Or they'll say something and I'll be like, "Who said that?" I'm, like, ready to write it down, and they're like, You said that."
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, that's good stuff. I'm glad somebody caught it.
right? Because I just
Yeah.
open and speak, and so, good thing somebody's taken notes somewhere along the line, and it's helping them in their lives. But sorry, I sort of I distracted myself there. So, another area of your work has to do with religious trauma. And can you just sort of, like, unpack what that means and how you work with people in that regard? Because I hear the words and I know
Mhm.
what that means to me,
Mhm.
but I'm wondering.
Well, religious trauma is a wound that, is caused by either a particular individual experience that one has had
Mhm.
within the religious context or an overall experience, and I see both. I see people who have been either horrifically, physically, mentally, psychologically abused by their religion of origin, and I see people who have not been personally impacted, however, who have come to the realization that they have to question everything that they were taught. And so it's like having the rug ripped out from under them. And we actually kinda addressed this earlier where it's the thought that we knew exactly what was going on, and we knew how it was going to go, and we knew these things were solid, and then suddenly somebody ripped out the rug, and now we see that that was not in fact the case.
Right.
So, when people undergo either of these kinds of, um, episodes, it oftentimes will prohibit them from moving forward in life. It impacts their ability to trust, it impacts their skepticism, it impacts a lot of different things like dreams and feelings, and the the long-lasting impact can cause a psychospiritual, for lack of a better word, retardation, the inability to grow
Mm.
psychospiritually.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
so for me, a lot of what I do is hold space while they tell the story because telling stories is one of the most healing things that people can do for themselves is to actually take the intangible of what has happened and use their voice to make it tangible, to bring it out into the world for someone else to bear witness to. Not to solve the problem,
Right.
but to have empathy
Mhm.
and, empathy for the pain, and with grief and with abuse and with psychospiritual offense, the best thing that we can do is bear witness to that because it there's a quote that says that when you empathize with someone, it gives the pain meaning, and pain with meaning is bearable. And
Right.
so to help someone hold that burden, knowing that again, there's no going back to fix what it is that has happened, there's only moving forward. So what does that look like? And how are we going to go about it? And when do we feel that we're going to be safe enough to take those steps?
Mhm. Mhm.
So it fits in really well with grief.
I think yeah, and I think it fits in well again with what we were talking about earlier with the almost it's not religious belief, okay, but the belief that the United States is and has always been XYZ, right?
Mhm.
And that if you're a Democrat, that the Democratic Party is and was and has always been XYZ. And that when you begin to question that, or the rug is torn out, or the veils are torn from your eyes, and you see what has been there, right? That you didn't see, because belief is not the same thing as knowledge,
Yes,
right? So
very good.
now when we know, I feel like it's not quite religious trauma, but it's still a trauma of belief. It is still a kind of indoctrination that then it crumbles and you're left with who am I now?
Yeah, it's a betrayal of trust,
Yeah.
and it strips you. It strips you and makes you vulnerable.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
I think it's interesting that this is the year of the snake because of the vulnerability of the freshly shed
Yeah.
snake, that tender skin,
Mhm.
that fear, that need to kinda hide out for a bit and come too close and you're gonna get bitten. So,
Mhm.
there's a
Mhm.
lot of analogy there that is certainly suitable to our state of affairs. But,
Mhm.
yes, I think that any belief system or any environment that fosters a feeling of confidence in knowing where I am on the map, as you say,
Mhm.
and then realizing, "I I got no clue."
Right.
This has all been a sham, and I have no clue,
Mhm.
and, with religious trauma, these are people that have invested, a good portion of their entire life,
Right.
and some of them, a big financial piece
Mhm.
in supporting something that they knew to be true, and then to be so I mean, the word that came to mind was scandalized, but I don't think that that necessarily categorizes it properly, but, shocked,
Mhm.
shocked,
Mhm.
uh, and appalled that they could have been so duped, so misled for so long.
Mhm.
And, then comes the self-flagellation, and, some of it is so predictable
Right.
that we can actually talk about the trajectory of it before we even unpack the rest of the session.
It's very similar to as someone who is in recovery after having been married to a malignant, abusive narcissist and has
Yikes.
worked and have worked with many women and men over the years who have been in abusive relationships, that the pattern of intimate partner abuse is the same as the pattern of cult abuse, right?
Yeah.
So it's just that the cult leaders who are usually narcissistic personality disordered people who find each other because they do attract each other. They follow the same pattern, but it's with groups of people. So it's a group of leaders with groups of people as opposed to in an intimate partner relationship. But the patterns, if you read them side by side, there's like first we isolate you from your community, right?
Mhm.
And there's love bombing and then withdrawal and threats of violence and then or threats that are then backed off from so that you feel grateful that they didn't follow through, right? We're also seeing this on a political level now. Very interesting to me how the victims in both situations also have those same responses of how did this happen to me?
Mhm.
That was
Mhm.
one of my biggest questions when I finally saw what I was in, right? Who this person was and what I was in, what I had fallen for, right?
Mhm.
How did this happen to me?
Yeah.
I'm so blah, 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 blah,
It's a
blah.
big
How could,
question.
how could this happen, right?
Yeah. But it
Um,
also opens up your empathy for other people who are in a similar situation of saying,
yes.
"Okay, I see how it happened."
Yeah.
I did a workshop recently, and I'll share some of it with you here. One of the things that I think has come to light for me is the idea of a being, an entity that gets formed that has a life of its own when those narcissists come together. And so,
So an egregore of narcissistic tenant
yes. Yeah.
proportion.
So, for example,
Mhm,
MAGA is an egregore. An egregore, when it begins, requires a servitor, and that would be the charismatic leader.
mhm.
And so Trump would be the servitor of the egregore that is MAGA. However, the thing about egregores is that as they grow, as their power grows, they no longer require the servitor. They become strong enough to exist on their own, and that's where we are now.
Interesting.
This thing has taken on a life of its own,
Mhm.
and we have all of the subservient adherents to it who are gathered around it chanting, and that is powerful. That is a cone of power. If you think there are no magicians on those sides, then you've misjudged horrifically because they're
Horrifically.
some of the most powerful magicians in the world.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is creating this sort of it's almost like a Tory gas that the church used to hold this position with the revival tents and the whole idea that you're gathering all of this energy and all of these people and they all have the same frame of mind and they all have the same belief system and now they're all chanting together and it's intoxicating.
Yeah.
It's intoxicating
Yeah.
and the best way in my opinion to combat it is to get the people one at a time to actually disengage from the groupthink.
Yeah.
And then you get an egregore that's shriveling and dying, and we're not at that point yet.
Nowhere near it.
I
No,
think it may be coming sooner than I had originally hoped because what's happening right now is going to impact a whole lot of those people on levels that they were not suspecting, and they're gonna be doing that whole thing that we were just talking about, like, "How did this happen to
right,
me?"
right,
Right? Well,
and
that can't come soon enough for
right.
me.
I am not the person for those people to come to, right? There have to be people for them to come to that aren't going to then berate them.
Mhm.
I'm not the
Yeah,
one, but
I
there
I'm not
have to be
the
people
safest
who are
one.
willing to work with them.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm not necessarily safe space for that either.
yeah,
However, I think on a one-on-one, if I've got somebody that is standing in front of me going, "I screwed up,"
yeah,
"I bought the lie. I can probably work with that person,
mhm,
but, don't put me in the group therapy chair to lead that because I have too many big feelings about that
yeah,
to know myself. I know thyself is what the charge is, and I know that I'm not safe for those people in groups.
right, same. But there are people who are trained to do that and who can do that, and I suspect will do that if there is an opportunity for it to
Mm,
happen, you know? It's just
yeah.
not my work. Um, nope.
Yeah, yeah, watching as the country gets turned into USA Incorporated and treated like a corporation is devastating to
Yeah,
me, and, the fact that mental health as well as physical health are getting flushed down the toilet by those who deem them fraudulent or unnecessary is going to be something that we have to face too because the people who are trained to deal with those groups they're not going to have a pathway to do that. So it's all quite speculative and
mhm.
it's all quite anxiety inducing, and yet for me, I have to wait till it's right in front of my door. Um, you swing when they're pitched. Right now,
Right,
nothing's being pitched,
right, right.
but I do have people that are afraid they're gonna go hungry, and I do have people that are burying their dead or dealing with terminal illnesses or just trying to get through their lives
Yeah,
pregnant, and I can be there. I can be there for those people.
yes. Yeah. It's good to know, and I think that that's part of wisdom that comes with age as well, is knowing, right? That's not work that I am suited for, but this
Yeah.
is the work that I am suited for.
Mhm.
And to know that we don't have to be suited for everything that lands on our doorstep.
Right.
What we do have to what hopefully we know is who is suited and who we can refer people to,
Mhm.
when we know it's not me, right? It's not
Exactly, exactly, and I am more than happy to grab a shovel and help dig that tunnel to wherever it is that we're going, if that's where I'm needed, and it's but my strength would more than likely be back stirring that pot of soup
yeah,
to help sustain the ones that are doing the digging.
yeah, same.
And it's not a sense of shirking responsibility or laziness or any of that. I've done my time. I'm still willing to do it if I'm needed to do that,
Mhm.
but it's knowing that where my strengths and weaknesses lie, and if you want me to be able to do certain things, I may not be able to do those.
I think one of the most important things that we can do right now is, like I said, know who your neighbors are. Even if you've never talked to them before, go talk to them. Go
Yeah.
bring them something. Go tell them, I noticed, you got a new car, it's great. Or
Mhm.
I noticed your new roof, or I noticed whatever. But make connections with people. And if you have connections like that with people, um, we're looking to like build community, right? We're always talking about building community. Well, here we are. Now we have to, right?
Yeah,
And not community that we just meet at festivals, but community that's there,
on
um,
the ground.
on the ground. And so skill set having people inventory their skill sets,
Mhm.
right? What are the skills that I have? What are the skills that I can teach? What are the skills that I have, but I can no longer do because of my age, because of my ability, because of my health, because they took my meds away, because, right, for whatever. But knowing who has what skills in your community, and beyond that, who has what equipment, who
Yeah,
has propane stoves, right? So that when we all are growing our tomatoes, we can all help each other can them instead of everybody doing that alone.
right.
Who has the gardening equipment? Who has the snow removal equipment? Who has the inventory left from a store that they once owned and it's been sitting in their basement for years,
Yeah,
right?
who has chickens,
Right.
right?
Who has chickens? Who knows how to cook? Who
Yeah,
has medical experience? Who has midwifery experience? Who knows how to be with the dead, right?
mhm,
And the dying and the dead and the grieving.
mhm,
Um, these are skill sets that we need to know who we're going to go to because you're not going to maybe it will turn out that we can't go on Google and say midwife,
mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Or we can't go on Amazon and say propane burner, right?
yeah,
But we can go to our neighbor and say, "Hey, can I borrow that or can you bring it? We're going to all do this thing." The communities that we have been practicing building for as long as you and I have been doing what we do, now we have to do that in our neighborhoods.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I
not
learned
about like, do you love everybody? Do you like everybody? Do you have everything in common? It's about we are in this now together.
it's about the work.
Yeah.
It's about the work and achieving the goal of the work. I
Mm.
had a community that I trained in Montana last year that is fantastic. They live fairly remotely. It's almost like they have a homeowners association, only they don't live that close together,
Right.
but they have cultivated the members of their community carefully. They have lawyers, they have physicians, they have yoga instructors, they have birth midwives, they have gardeners, flower farmers, and now they have death midwives.
Yeah.
And some of the group that I trained, they were smoke jumpers and first responders for wilderness rescue.
Mm,
So the skill sets were unbelievable, and yet they are this community that is making this happen, and they get together. The one has a yoga yurt that is just beautiful.
mhm.
Hardwood floor, wood burning stove, and
Oh,
they have their meetings and decide what it is they're going to do and who's going to do what and what needs to
mhm.
be done, and essentially, they just wanna be left alone,
Yeah.
but they're gathering their skills, and so, I learned a lot from them, and also, as you said, when I teach these death midwife classes, I say, "Build a community of death midwives that are close n to you." You only need 1 massage table, you only need, 1 gurney, you only need 1 backboard. You don't have to have every death midwife has to have these pieces of equipment,
Right.
lean on each other.
Right.
And so seeing that actually operating and working out in the world, it is so important.
Mhm.
And as pagans, we need to let go of that snobbery of, well, I don't like my neighbors or, those people aren't like me or whatever. It's like you don't have the luxury of that anymore.
Nope. Nope. 'Cause that's your neighbor. That's
Mm,
who is right there, and if you don't have transportation, if you don't have a grocery store, and I mean, who knows what's coming, but if you don't have the luxuries that you have right now, then you have to figure out how you're gonna talk to your neighbor.
mm,
If we can't talk to our neighbor, what are we doing?
Well, and going over there, with your pentacle blazing and your all talk and not listen is going to get you absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
Yep.
I agree. We are of the Mutual Admiration Society. I
Well, I admire your work in the world, and people that I respect and admire said, "Oh, oh, oh, Angie Buchanan, get her on.
Oh,
You gotta meet her. You have to meet her." And it was so funny, Angie, because it was days after that, and I think it was before you asked me to come to
Feast of
Feast of
Light.
Nights. It was like in that little period, the universe was like, "You guys need to talk. You need to talk."
Mm.
Um, and so someone had said, and then you contacted me. I'm like, I don't even know how she knows how to contact me. And was so upset that I couldn't do that thing because I really wanted to do it. But I hope that we have more discussions on camera, off camera. I think that we need to be talking. Like
Mhm.
these women who I'm like curating, not for my use, but for this forum where people get to hear us speak and we're not being presenters.
Well, our resource library.
Yeah.
When I was doing Gaia's Womb, the women's retreat, we would have the first blood ceremonies for the young women,
Mhm.
and part of their ceremony consisted of them going around in different places in the building that we were in, which is an old Victorian style dormitory, entering the circles of women, the maidens, the mothers, the queens, the crones, and sitting asking, "May I enter your circle?" And then sitting down and listening to them talk about what it's like to be in that body during that time period of their life. And I think that's what we end up with, is saying you now have this circle of women who are your resource library for you to go to
Yeah.
whenever you have a question or a need. And that's, I think, what you're doing is, or that's how I perceive what you're doing, is you're building that resource library, and I love you for doing it, and
Mhm.
I'm glad that we were able to connect. I'm not even really sure that I recall how that happened, other than it was the Facebook thing. And,
Mhm.
yeah, I feel like we each have a piece in this, but, the
So we
grandmother
all
spider.
keep coming together and what's the song that keeps coming up every time I do one of these interviews is that old song of old woman is weaving, gathering the threads,
Yes,
you know, um,
yes.
gathering the colors. Um, all my life I've been waiting for old woman and now I find her in myself. And
Mhm.
we have to look around and say, "And where else is she? Where else
Yeah,
is she? She's
yeah,
inside.
who
She's
else
I know
holds
she's in
the
me,
thread?
but where are the other wise women who have been doing the work
Mhm.
for a lifetime? And let's get you all sharing whatever wisdom you can in an hour." Angie, I'm
Yeah.
so grateful to have you here. This conversation is so rich and deep and necessary in this moment. And I'm glad it's you this week. I think things have been particularly wound up this week. And so it's good to have you on. You'll be on this Saturday.
Alright, I'll touch bases with you so that I can put the link out, but thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the forum to discuss these things, and it's given me some things to think about and some affirmations, and I appreciate all of that.
Of course. Thanks for listening, everybody.